Pain is unavoidable. But what destroys the self is not pain itself. It is pain without meaning. Some emerge from suffering diminished. Others emerge sharpened, weighted, and awake. The difference is not what happened to them. It is how the self learned to stand inside the fire. In this reflection, Iqbal teaches that pain is not punishment, but instruction. Suffering does not weaken the self by default. When understood rightly, it becomes one of the deepest forces through which Khudi gains depth, realism, and strength. Today, we continue our 50-part journey through Asrar-e Khudi, Allama Iqbal's meditation on the becoming of the self. This is episode 17. Take a moment, steady your attention, and allow these reflections on pain and meaning to unfold slowly. Pain enters every life, not as accident, not as exception, but as certainty. The self is not asked whether it wants pain. It is asked what it will become through it. Most suffering is not destructive. Most suffering is uninterpreted. Pain without meaning crushes the self. Pain with meaning forges it. The self does not grow despite suffering. It grows through suffering. When suffering is understood correctly, misunderstood pain creates bitterness. Understood pain creates depth. The first mistake the self makes is treating pain as punishment. Punishment implies guilt. Guilt weakens will. Pain is not accusation. Pain is instruction. Suffering reveals whether the self collapses inward or expands outward. The same fire can reduce one soul to ash and temper another into steel. Fire is neutral. Response is not. The self that resists pain learns nothing from it. The self that listens to pain discovers its limits, its strength, and its direction. Pain shows what matters. What does pain threaten? What does it expose as fragile? These questions reveal attachment. Attachment reveals dependency. Dependency shows where freedom is missing. No self becomes strong without confronting discomfort. Comfort preserves what exists. Pain demands change. Change is the condition of growth. The self that avoids pain avoids maturation. Avoidance shrinks life. Engagement enlarges it. Pain forces engagement. Whether the self consents or not, most pain comes uninvited. Loss, failure, rejection, disappointment, illness, limitation. The self does not choose these, but it chooses interpretation. Interpretation determines outcome. Two selves face the same suffering. One asks, "Why is this happening to me?" The other asks, What is this demanding of me? One collapses. The other evolves. Pain removes illusion. Illusion survives comfort. Pain strips pretension. False confidence. Borrowed identity. What remains is essential. Essence is the foundation of strength. The self often discovers purpose only after pain removes distraction. What seemed urgent shrinks. What seemed optional reveals necessity. Pain clarifies priority. The self that has never suffered often judges shallowly. Suffering deepens compassion. Compassion humanizes power. Power guided by compassion does not become cruelty. Pain humbles the arrogant self. Arrogance survives success, pain punctures it. Humility does not weaken the self. It grounds it. Grounded selves endure. Pain reveals endurance. Without pain, the self would never know how much it can carry. Endurance is invisible until tested. Testing reveals capacity. The self must learn that pain is not evidence of failure. It is evidence of participation in life. Avoiding pain requires avoiding significance. Significance demands exposure. The self that seeks meaning must accept vulnerability. Invulnerability is stagnation. Vulnerability opens growth. Pain enters through openness. Openness expands identity. Suffering narrows attention. Distraction dissolves. The present moment sharpens. The self becomes concentrated. Concentration intensifies awareness. Pain also slows time. Moments stretch. Reflection deepens. This slowing is not cruelty. It is opportunity. Opportunity to understand. The self that rushes past pain remains shallow. Depth is carved slowly. Pain carves. It leaves marks. Marks become character. Not all suffering should be glorified. Some pain warns. Some pain requires correction. The self must distinguish between pain that refines and pain that signals misalignment. Wisdom discerns. Blind endurance destroys. Pain becomes destructive when it is meaningless. Meaningless pain breeds resentment. Resentment poisons the soul. Meaning redeems pain. The self redeems pain by asking the right question. Not how do I escape, but what does this require me to become? Pain is not here to make the self smaller. It is here to make the self precise. Precision removes excess. Excess weakens structure. Reduce self becomes focused self. Pain does not ask for collapse. It asks for reorganization. Old habits fail. Old strategies break. The self adapts. Adaptation is intelligence born of suffering. The self that adapts through pain gains realism. Fantasy evaporates. Illusion dissolves. Reality, though harsher, is workable. Workable reality empowers. Pain also reveals false dependencies. When what the self relied on disappears, true strength must emerge. Emergence is uncomfortable, birth always is. Pain carries a question. Every question has an answer. But the answer requires listening. Listening requires silence. Silence requires courage. The self must stop fighting pain to hear it. The self that listens discovers that pain is not endless, but meaning extracted from pain remains. Meaning changes identity. Identity shapes destiny. Pain teaches the self to obey reality rather than desire. Desire imagines life as it should be. Pain presents life as it is. The self becomes strong when it accepts reality without surrendering purpose. Acceptance is not resignation. Resignation collapses will. Acceptance sharpens strategy. Only what is accepted can be transformed. The self often wastes pain by turning it inward as complaint. Complaint multiplies pain without producing insight. Pain turned outward into inquiry produces wisdom. The self that asks, "What did this pain cost me?" learns scarcity. The self that asks, "What is this pain teaching me?" learns expansion. One tightens, the other deepens. Pain introduces the self to its own fragility. Fragility is not weakness. Fragility is truth. Truth invites care. Care builds resilience. The resilient self does not deny pain. It integrates it. Integrated pain strengthens structure. An integrated pain fractures it. Pain forces the self to choose values. What will be preserved when everything cannot be? Pain eliminates luxury. It demands essential commitment. Essentials define identity. The self that endures pain consciously develops gravity. Gravity stabilizes character. Light cells drift. Weighted cells stand firm. Pain humbles ambition without erasing it. The ambitious self learns to temper speed. Speed without control breaks structure. Pain enforces pacing. The self grows quieter after pain. Noise feels intolerable. Depth becomes preferable. Depth refines aspiration. Refined aspiration lasts. Pain also corrects entitlement. Entitlement survives ease. Pain dissolves entitlement. Equity replaces expectation. The self becomes fair. With itself, and tolerance strengthens. Tolerance increases longevity. Longevity supports contribution. Pain changes how success is defined. Success stops being accumulation. It becomes alignment. Alignment survives loss. Accumulation does not. The self learns that not everything lost is tragedy. Some losses are liberation. Pain reveals what was imprisoning. Release hurts before it heals. Pain removes superficial desire. Desire without depth evaporates. Depth remains. Remaining desire is worth pursuing. Pain purifies motivation. The self must avoid making pain its identity. Pain is an experience, not a definition. Those who become pain-bound collapse inward. Those who pass through pain expand outward. Pain does not ask the self to worship suffering. It asks the self to learn from it. Learning completes pain's purpose. Prolonging pain through refusal creates needless self-destruction. The self must learn to grieve. Grief honors loss. Unacknowledged grief turns into bitterness. Bitterness poisons creativity. Grief processed creates maturity. Pain deepens empathy. The self that has suffered recognizes suffering in others. Recognition humanizes interaction. Humanized interaction creates ethical presence. The self learns that suffering shared silently creates isolation. Suffering integrated with meaning creates solidarity. Pain tests the self's values. When comfort disappears, values speak what remains valued. Under pain is what defines the self. The self that escapes pain repeatedly becomes brittle. Brittleness shatters under pressure. Resilience requires inoculation. Pain inoculates. Dose matters. Too much destroys. Too little weakens. Wisdom calibrates endurance. Pain also introduces the self to finitude. Limits become undeniable. Limit awareness refines decision-making. Choices sharpen. Waste diminishes. Life becomes deliberate. The self learns that time is not unlimited. Awareness of time intensifies presence. Presence sanctifies life. Sanctified life feels meaningful even when difficult. Pain interrupts autopilot existence. Routine cracks. Consciousness awakens. Awakened consciousness is pain's hidden gift. The self must be careful not to romanticize pain, nor flee it reflexively. Both errors distort growth. Balanced engagement instructs. Instruction elevates. Pain without reflection becomes trauma. Pain with reflection becomes wisdom. Reflection transforms suffering into knowledge. Knowledge empowers choice. The self gains sobriety through pain. Illusion dissolves. Reality remains. Reality is workable. Workable reality is strength. Pain teaches the self to release what cannot be controlled. Control addiction intensifies suffering. Release restores equilibrium. Equilibrium stabilizes action. The self that has endured pain, but not processed it, carries residue. Residue leaks into behavior. Processing cleans the wound. Clean wounds heal. Pain also teaches silence. Not silence of suppression. Silence of respect. Some experiences cannot be verbalized immediately. Premature narration distorts meaning. Silence allows truth to emerge. The self that grants pain time extracts insight. Insight outlasts suffering. Life becomes richer. Richer life carries pain differently. Pain reminds the self that it is alive. Numbness is worse than pain. Pain means presence. Presence is prerequisite for growth. The self must learn to remain human under pain. Dehumanization occurs when pain turns into resentment. Resentment deforms identity. Understanding restores form. Pain also reveals strength networks. Who remains? What endures? Pain clarifies relationship value. Clarity strengthens discernment. The self that interprets pain wisely emerges with restraint. Restraint internalizes power. Power restrained lasts. The self realizes that no growth bypasses pain. The path around pain leads back to infancy. Growth demands confrontation. Confrontation matures. Pain forces the self to descend inward. This descent is not collapse. It is excavation. What is excavated becomes foundation. Foundation supports height. There comes a moment when the self realizes that suffering was never pointless. It was directional. It pointed the self toward depth. When surface living failed, the self that survives suffering does not return unchanged. It carries gravity. Gravity stabilizes identity. Light cells scatter. Weighted cells endure. Pain rearranges priorities. Trivial desires evaporate. Essential commitments remain. This clarity is the quiet reward of endurance. The self learns that life is not fair, but it can be meaningful. Meaning compensates for injustice in ways pleasure never could. Pleasure fades. Meaning accumulates. The self that extracts meaning from pain does not become bitter, bitterness results from unresolved suffering. Resolution transforms pain into architecture. Pain reshapes the inner narrative. The story changes. The self moves from victim to participant to contributor. Narrative alignment restores dignity. The self learns to carry pain without exhibition. Public performance of pain locks it into identity. Private integration releases it. Integration completes experience. Pain grants the self a deeper voice. What once felt dramatic now sounds shallow. Speech becomes measured. Expression refined. The self that has suffered does not assume entitlement to ease. Ease becomes gratitude. Gratitude stabilizes happiness. Happiness rooted in gratitude endures. This shift marks maturity. Pain also dissolves dependency on external validation. Validation feels insufficient when survival is required. Internal resources awaken. Self-reliance deepens. The self understands that suffering connects all lives. Individual pain reveals universal vulnerability. This realization humanizes interaction. Humanized interaction creates compassion without sentimentality. The self gains humility, not humiliation. Humility born from contact with limits. Limits teach reverence for life. Reverence refines ambition. Ambition purified serves better purposes. Pain trains patience with ambiguity. Not all answers arrive quickly. Ambiguity no longer feels threatening. Patience deepens perspective. Perspective stabilizes response. The self no longer resists suffering blindly. Nor does it chase suffering deliberately. It learns to engage suffering as teacher, not as master. Mastery remains within the self. The self retains agency, even under hardship. Agency prevents despair. Despair rots initiative. Agency preserves movement. Movement preserves life. Pain deepens ethical awareness. The self knows what it costs to be human. This knowledge restrains cruelty. Cruelty thrives on ignorance. Understanding dissolves it. The self evolves, not into invulnerability, but into resilience. Resilience bends. It does not shatter. Resilience adapts. It does not freeze. The self recognizes that pain revealed falseness, false strength, false priorities, false identity. What survives exposure is authentic. Authenticity strengthens presence. Pain also teaches gratitude. Survival itself feels meaningful. Ordinary moments regain weight. Weight increases appreciation. Appreciation deepens contentment. The self realizes that it is not alone. Every life carries wounds. Awareness of shared vulnerability creates solidarity. Solidarity heals isolation. The self that has integrated suffering ceases to fear it blindly. Fear loses authority. Authority returns to reason and conscience. Pain teaches the self that existence demands courage. Not dramatic courage. Persistent courage. The courage to stay human. The courage to learn. The courage to continue. The self that grows through pain develops spiritual density. Not ideology. Not belief. Density of being. Being rooted in reality. Cannot be shaken easily. The self finally understands that pain was never the destination. It was passage. What mattered was what the self carried through it. What the self became. The transformation did not erase scars. Scars record growth. They mark survival. Survival dignified becomes wisdom. The self does not emerge superior. It emerges integrated. Integration stabilizes life. Integrated selves contribute quietly, but powerfully. Pain, experienced consciously, does not destroy meaning. It reveals it. Meaning reveals self. Self refined through pain steps forward, not as victim, but as witness to strength. And from that witness, life moves on. Deeper. Quieter. More honest.